Ethan Parker arrived at his uncle's house on a quiet Friday evening, expecting nothing more than a calm weekend away from his usual routine. The house stood in a peaceful neighborhood outside Portland, surrounded by tall trees and neat lawns. It was the kind of place where everything felt safe and predictable. Ethan had visited many times before, and every time he came, the house felt warm and welcoming. His uncle, Daniel Parker, was known for being calm and dependable. He worked long hours, but he always made time for family. His wife, Laura, was friendly and kind, always greeting guests with a gentle smile that made people feel comfortable. Immediately, that evening had been simple. They ate dinner together, talked about small things, and laughed a few times about old family memories. Daniel asked Ethan about school and future plans, giving him the same thoughtful advice he always gave. Laura listened quietly most of the time, occasionally adding a joke or asking Ethan if he wanted more food. Everything seemed normal. If someone had walked into the house that night, they would have seen a peaceful family enjoying a quiet evening together. Around 10 o'clock, Daniel yawned and stretched his arms. "Long day tomorrow," he said with a small laugh. He stood up and patted Ethan on the shoulder before heading toward the hallway. Laura stayed behind to clean the dishes while Ethan helped dry them. The kitchen filled with the soft sounds of running water and clinking plates. Laura hummed softly while she worked, and Ethan noticed how calm she seemed. There was nothing unusual about the moment. When the last dish was placed in the cabinet, Laura smiled and told Ethan to get some rest. By 11, the house was silent. Daniel was asleep in his bedroom, and Laura had gone upstairs. Ethan lay in the guest room scrolling through his phone, but sleep refused to come. The unfamiliar quiet of the house made every small sound noticeable. The ticking clock in the hallway, the distant hum of the refrigerator. Even the faint movement of wind outside the windows felt louder than usual. Eventually, Ethan decided to get up and grab a glass of water. He walked down the hallway carefully so he wouldn't wake anyone. The house looked different at night. Shadows stretched across the walls, and the soft yellow light from a small lamp in the living room created a peaceful glow. Ethan moved into the kitchen, opened the cabinet, and filled a glass with cold water. He leaned against the counter and took a slow drink, enjoying the cool silence. That was when he heard it. A soft buzzing sound. At first, he thought it was the refrigerator making noise, but then it buzzed again. The sound was coming from the living room. Curious, Ethan stepped toward the couch. A phone lay there on the cushion, its screen lighting up with another vibration. He recognized it immediately as Laura's phone. Ethan didn't plan to look at it. He only glanced because the screen lit up again. The message preview appeared clearly under the sender's name. "I miss you already. Tonight meant everything to me." Ethan blinked in confusion. The words felt strange and personal, the kind of message someone sends to a partner or someone they deeply care about. For a second, he assumed it must be an old friend or maybe a relative, but the phone buzzed again before he could look away. "I wish you didn't have to go back home to him." The sentence made Ethan freeze completely. His mind struggled to understand what he had just read. The living room suddenly felt smaller, like the air had grown heavier. Ethan glanced down the hallway toward Daniel's bedroom. The door was closed and the house remained perfectly quiet. Another message appeared. "When can we see each other again?" Ethan stepped back from the couch as if the phone had suddenly become dangerous. His heart beat faster and confusion filled his thoughts. The name on the message was simple, Ryan. Ethan searched his memory but couldn't remember ever hearing Laura mention anyone named Ryan before. Just then, footsteps sounded from the hallway. Laura walked into the room. She stopped immediately when she saw Ethan standing near the couch. For a brief moment, her expression changed. Her eyes widened slightly and her shoulders stiffened. But the reaction disappeared quickly, replaced by the calm smile Ethan was used to seeing. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked gently. Ethan nodded, suddenly feeling awkward, just getting water. Laura walked toward the couch and picked up her phone quickly. Her eyes moved across the screen for a split second before she locked it and slipped it into her pocket. The room became quiet again. "Late nights happen sometimes," she said softly, almost as if she were explaining something without directly saying it. Ethan wasn't sure how to respond. His mind kept replaying the words he had seen on the screen. He looked toward the hallway again. "Your uncle works hard," Laura continued in a calm voice. "He needs his rest." Ethan nodded slowly. Sentence felt strangely heavy, like it carried more meaning than it should have. He finished his water and quietly returned upstairs. The guest room suddenly felt uncomfortable. Ethan lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, trying to understand. What he had seen? Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the messages were just from an old friend speaking emotionally. But the words didn't sound casual. Minutes passed, then nearly an hour. Sleep never came. Around 1:30 in the morning, Ethan heard a sound from downstairs. It was soft, but clear enough to catch his attention. He sat up in bed and listened, carefully. The front door was opening. His curiosity pulled him out of bed again. He moved slowly into the hallway and peeked down the stairs. The lights downstairs were off, but the faint glow from outside streetlights made the living room visible. Laura stood near the door. She moved carefully, trying not to make noise. She slipped on a jacket and quietly stepped outside, closing the door behind her. Ethan's heart began racing again. Something about the situation felt strange. He walked to the small window at the end of the hallway and looked outside. A car was parked near the curb in front of the house. The engine was running softly, its headlights dimmed. Laura walked toward it slowly. The driver stepped out. Even from a distance, Ethan could see he was a tall man wearing a dark jacket. When Laura reached him, the man smiled and opened his arms. She stepped forward and they embraced. It wasn't a quick greeting. It was the kind of hug that lasted longer than normal. The porch light flickered on automatically as they moved closer to the house. For a brief moment, the light illuminated their faces clearly enough for Ethan to see the warmth in their expressions. They looked happy to see each other. Too happy. Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered Daniel sleeping peacefully in the bedroom down the hall. His uncle had always trusted people easily. He believed in loyalty and honesty. The thought of him resting comfortably while something complicated happened outside made Ethan feel uneasy. The two figures near the car spoke quietly. Ethan couldn't hear the words, but their body language told a story. Laura laughed softly at something the man said, then looked down as if she were nervous. The man gently touched her hand and she didn't pull away. After a few minutes, Laura stepped back. She said something quietly, then gave the man one last hug before walking back toward the house. The car slowly drove away into the darkness. Ethan quickly moved back to his room before Laura came inside. He closed the door softly and sat on the edge of the bed, his thoughts racing. The image he had just seen refused to leave his mind. It felt like he had accidentally stepped into someone else's secret. Downstairs, the front door closed quietly. Again, the house returned to its deep silence, as if nothing had happened. But Ethan knew something had changed. He laid down again and stared at the ceiling, thinking about his uncle. Daniel had always treated Laura with kindness and respect. He trusted her completely. Anyone could see that. Yet tonight, Ethan had watched her meet another man in the middle of the night. The messages on her phone echoed again in his mind. "Miss you already. Tonight meant everything to me." Ethan felt caught between two uncomfortable choices. If what he had seen meant what he thought it meant, then Daniel deserved to know. But what if Ethan misunderstood the situation? What if there was some explanation he didn't know about? Hours passed slowly while he struggled with these questions. By the time the first light of morning touched the windows, Ethan realized something painful. He had become the only person in the house who knew about Laura's secret. Daniel was still asleep, unaware that his quiet, peaceful life might not be as perfect as it seemed. And Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this story was only beginning. Because sometimes the truth behind a secret is far more complicated than it first appears. Ethan barely slept that morning. The image of Laura meeting Ryan outside the house kept replaying in his mind over and over. The quiet house suddenly felt heavy, as if every corner held a secret he wasn't supposed to know. He stared at the ceiling of the guest room, wondering if he had really seen what he thought he had. His mind raced with questions. Why was Laura meeting this man? Was she betraying his uncle? And why did it seem so tender, so emotional? Ethan had never thought much about adult relationships before. He had never seen anyone he cared about act like this. The thought of Daniel sleeping peacefully in the next room, trusting the woman he loved completely, made Ethan's stomach twist by the time the sun rose. Ethan was exhausted but restless. He quietly got up, careful not to wake anyone. The house smelled faintly of coffee and bread. Daniel was already in the kitchen, moving with his usual calm efficiency. He poured a cup of coffee and smiled when he saw Ethan. "Morning, kid," Daniel said. "Sleep okay, Ethan?" Hesitated, not sure how much to reveal. "Yeah, I guess," he muttered, keeping his voice even. Daniel nodded, sipping his coffee, completely unaware of the storm brewing in Ethan's mind. Ethan watched his uncle studying the familiar face, wondering how someone could seem so normal. While everything outside the bedroom door felt complicated and secret, Laura walked in a few minutes later. Hair tied back loosely, looking calm but a little tired. She greeted both of them with her warm, familiar smile. For a moment, her eyes met Ethan's. There was a flicker in them, subtle but noticeable. As if she knew he had seen something he shouldn't. Ethan felt the tension between, wanting to ask and fearing the answer. He avoided looking at her for a few seconds, pretending to be busy with breakfast. Laura moved around the kitchen, preparing coffee for herself and keeping her movements casual. But Ethan could see the quiet weight she carried. Daniel left for work shortly after breakfast, leaving the house silent again. Ethan wandered into the backyard where Laura was tending to her plants. The sunlight cast soft shadows over the garden, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. Ethan hesitated, then finally spoke. "Who's Ryan?" The question came out softer than he expected, almost a whisper, but Laura froze immediately. The watering can stopped moving midair. She didn't answer right away. For a few seconds, all Ethan could hear was the sound of water dripping from the leaves onto the soil. Laura looked up slowly and met Ethan's eyes. "You saw the messages?" she said quietly. Her voice had no anger, no fear, only a soft acceptance. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. He wanted to apologize, but words felt too small. Laura set the watering can down and sat on one of the garden chairs. She looked toward the sky, taking a deep breath as if gathering courage. "You must think I'm a terrible person," she said quietly. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. He just watched her, waiting for her to explain. Laura's voice trembled slightly when she continued. "Ryan and I knew each other before I met your uncle." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Ethan leaned forward slightly, curious and cautious at the same time. Laura continued. "We were young and we loved each other deeply. Life took us in different directions, and I thought I had moved on." Ethan listened, carefully. He could feel her honesty, the sincerity in her tone. "Then you met my uncle?" he asked softly. Laura nodded. "Yes, Daniel is kind, stable, safe. He is everything I thought I needed in life. I love him in a different way, a mature, peaceful way, but sometimes the heart remembers things the mind tries to forget." Ethan frowned slightly, unsure what to say. "So, what about Ryan?" he asked, curiosity mixed with worry. Laura looked down at her hands, fingers twisting together. "Nervously, when Ryan moved back to the city, I ran into him. It brought back memories, old feelings I thought were gone. Her voice was quiet but filled with emotion. Ethan watched her closely, trying to understand. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the pull of the past against the life she had chosen. "But you're not leaving my uncle?" he asked carefully. Laura shook her head immediately, almost as if the question had surprised her. "No, Daniel deserves the best version of me. He deserves loyalty, honesty, and a love built on trust. I made a choice. I stay with him because this life, this love, is real. Ryan reminds me of the past, but Daniel, he is my present and my future." Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. This wasn't a simple story of betrayal. It was more complex. It was about choices, about what the heart feels versus what the mind decides. Laura wiped a tear from her cheek, and Ethan realized how heavy this secret had been on her, too. "I've been meeting Ryan," she admitted quietly, "but last night was the last time. Need to honor what I have with your uncle." Ethan nodded slowly, sensing the weight behind her words. They sat in silence for a few moments. Ethan noticed how her eyes softened when she looked toward the house, toward the room where Daniel slept peacefully every night. She seemed to draw strength from that image, from the reality of the life she had chosen. Ethan realized that love was not always about following feelings blindly. Sometimes it was about choosing the right path, even when it was hard. Finally, Laura stood and looked at Ethan. "I didn't mean for you to see any of this," she said softly. "But sometimes, knowing the truth helps people understand that life and love are complicated. Daniel has no idea, and he shouldn't. This isn't about hiding. It's about protecting what matters most." Ethan nodded, feeling the truth in her words. He realized that adults often carried burdens in silence, making choices that weren't always clear to outsiders. That evening, when Daniel returned home from work, Laura greeted him at the door with a warm, genuine hug. Ethan watched quietly. From the hallway, there was no tension, no awkwardness, only a comforting normalcy. They laughed together in the kitchen as they prepared dinner. Ethan could see how much Laura cared for Daniel, how intentional her actions were. He understood that sometimes love required discipline, self-control, and commitment more than constant passion or excitement. As the night fell, Ethan lay in his guest room again. The house was quiet, but this time the silence felt safe. He thought about what he had witnessed, about the complexity of love and loyalty, and about the choices people make when the past collides with the present. He realized that some secrets destroy families while others preserve them, guiding people toward growth and understanding. Laura had made a difficult choice, one that honored her marriage and respected Daniel. Ethan felt a quiet admiration for her and a new understanding of the adult world. Finally, he drifted off to sleep, knowing that sometimes the strongest love stories were not the ones without temptation, but the ones in which people chose each other, even when the heart whispered a different story. The house, once heavy with secrecy, now felt full of trust, warmth, and the quiet strength of commitment. And Ethan, having witnessed the delicate balance of past and present, realized he had learned something far more important than any story he had heard before. He had learned about choices, consequences, and the courage it takes to love wisely. The night ended not with heartbreak, but with understanding, peace, and the reassurance that some secrets, when handled with care, can protect love rather than destroy it.